They had gathered for what had been declared a momentous occasion, the sentencing of the first human ever to stand trial before the highest governing body of the known universe. Simon Jones stood at the heart of the tribunal, bound in shimmering restraints that disrupted his neural impulses, rendering his body a prisoner of its own weight. Though his muscles ached from hours of immobility, he kept his posture unbowed, his gaze fixed on the central dais, where Chancellor Rithvax, the chief arbiter of this farcical proceeding, loomed over him with barely concealed disdain. The Zarthan's reptilian features were unreadable, but Simon had dealt with his kind long enough to recognize the scent of triumph in the subtle flare of his nostrils. "You stand accused of crimes against the Galactic Order," Rithvax intoned, his voice a deliberate mixture of theatrical weight and quiet malice. "Treason, incitement of rebellion, and conspiracy to destabilize the balance of power among sovereign species." Simon exhaled slowly, his lips twitching into a ghost of a smirk. He had spent years maneuvering through the labyrinth of interstellar diplomacy, outwitting those who sought to undermine Earth's rising influence. He had always known his enemies would come for him, but he had underestimated their reach, their patience. Now, here he was, paraded like a trophy, his fate already sealed before the trial had begun. "The evidence," continued the Chancellor, "is irrefutable." A projected display flared to life above the tribunal, showcasing a carefully curated selection of footage, falsified transmissions, and testimonies from compromised witnesses. Simon recognized elements of truth woven into the deception, conversations spliced together, his voice lifted from unrelated discussions, context twisted beyond recognition. Commander Alden King watched from the shadows of the observation balcony, his hands clenched so tightly that his nails threatened to pierce his palms. He had fought in the trenches of interstellar warfare, seen the horrors of planetary sieges, but nothing compared to the cold brutality of watching a good man be crushed under the weight of political machinations. His orders were clear: do not intervene. The chain of command had been explicit: Simon Jones was expendable. Earth would not risk war over a single diplomat. But King had never been one to follow orders without question. Simon's voice, calm but edged with defiance, cut through the chamber. "This is not justice. This is theater. You fear humanity's resilience, our ability to adapt, to thrive in the void you call order." He turned his gaze deliberately, sweeping over the gathered delegates. "You call us dangerous. Perhaps we are. But I am not the villain of this story." A murmur rippled through the assembly, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring impassively. Rithvax's pupils narrowed to slits. "You misunderstand, Ambassador. This is not about justice." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper that only Simon could hear. "This is about sending a message." The moment stretched, the silence within the chamber broken only by the rhythmic hum of the containment field surrounding Simon. Then, with a flick of his clawed hand, the Chancellor delivered the final decree. "The sentence is death, effective immediately." A collective gasp rippled through the spectators, though none dared to voice opposition. Simon's breath hitched, not from fear, but from the stark finality of the moment. He had expected imprisonment, exile perhaps. Execution, however, was an escalation of another magnitude. Guards descended upon him, disengaging the restraints just long enough to replace them with physical shackles. His arms were wrenched behind his back, the cold bite of metal pressing against his wrists. He was led, step by step, through the towering archway at the back of the chamber, out onto the execution platform. The sight that awaited him made his stomach lurch. The gallows were primitive, a cruel mockery of ancient human punishments. A thick, woven cord swayed gently in the artificial breeze, the noose already prepared. Below, on the plaza floor, hundreds of alien dignitaries and civilians had gathered to witness the spectacle. Giant screens projected his image, ensuring that no one missed a second of his demise. Simon lifted his chin. He would not beg. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. As they forced him onto the execution platform, his gaze caught movement near the periphery of the crowd. A figure, clad in civilian garb but moving with military precision, tilted his head ever so slightly. King. He was here. The realization sent a jolt through Simon's system. He wanted to believe it meant rescue, that anyone would intervene. But the moment passed and nothing happened. A hooded executioner stepped forward, silent, methodical. The noose was slipped around Simon's neck, tightened with practiced efficiency. He inhaled deeply, the rough fibers biting into his skin. The world around him blurred, not with fear, but with clarity. Every detail crystallized in his mind. The cold steel beneath his boots, the faint scent of oil on the rope, the hushed murmurs of the onlookers. He turned his head slightly, finding the nearest recording drone. If this was to be his end, he would ensure his words carried beyond this moment. "You think you're ending something here?" His voice rang out, steady, unwavering. "But you're only beginning a war." A single lever was pulled. The floor vanished beneath him. The snap echoed across the plaza, and in the silence that followed, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. On Earth, across the vast expanse of space, millions watched as Simon Jones's body went still. The signal cut out moments later, but the damage had already been done. In the control chamber of Earth's military high command, President Nathaniel Vaughn sat in silence, his expression carved from stone. Around him, his highest-ranking officials exchanged uneasy glances, awaiting the inevitable decree. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of hesitation. "They have chosen their fate." He turned to General Carl Mercer, the veteran commander who had overseen humanity's most brutal conflicts. "Prepare for war." Mercer met his gaze, a slow nod of understanding passing between them. Across the room, Dr. Isaac Wren adjusted his glasses, already calculating the deployment of the weapons they had sworn never to use. The air in the chamber was thick with unspoken fury, a storm gathering before the inevitable strike. Humanity had been provoked, and the galaxy would soon learn what it meant to cross them. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of President Nathaniel Vaughn's fingers against the polished surface of the war table. A map of the galaxy flickered in midair, its holographic projection highlighting the territories controlled by the Galactic Council, the Zenovian bloc, and the few neutral systems that had yet to declare allegiance. Earth's influence was a mere fraction of the vast dominion before them, a single ember against an ocean of stars. And yet, an ember could start a wildfire. General Carl Mercer stood at the head of the chamber, arms folded behind his back, his uniform impeccable despite the long hours of preparation. His steel-gray eyes, weathered by decades of war, held no uncertainty. He had fought too many battles, seen too many worlds reduced to cinders, to believe in hesitation. "They want to see us broken," Mercer said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of inevitability. "They want to make an example of Jones, to remind us that humanity is nothing but an upstart species playing in an arena far beyond its reach." He let the words settle, let them fester in the quiet rage simmering beneath the surface of every man in the room. "They believe we will submit." President Vaughn stopped tapping. His hand curled into a fist. "Then let's teach them otherwise." A flicker of approval passed through Mercer's eyes before he turned to Admiral Benjamin Holcroft, the man responsible for commanding Earth's First Fleet. Holcroft was younger than Mercer by a decade, his face still retaining some of the smoothness of youth, but his record left no doubt as to his capability. He had spearheaded the last major conflict against the Zareth Raiders, emerging victorious against impossible odds. Now his expertise would be tested on an entirely new scale. "The fleet is ready," Holcroft confirmed. 72 capital ships, along with 4 Dreadnought-class warships. The Black Lance, our flagship, will lead the assault. The moment you give the order, we begin Operation Iron Requiem. The name alone carried a promise of devastation. Dr. Isaac Wren adjusted his glasses, his fingers flicking through tactical readouts that streamed across his datapad. Wren was a civilian scientist by designation, but his hands had shaped the most advanced weapons humanity had ever conceived. Where others saw conflict as an inevitable necessity, he saw it as an equation, one that, when solved correctly, left no margin for failure. The Zenovian bloc has no true understanding of our technological capabilities, Wren stated. They've seen our conventional military strength, but they are wholly unaware of the classified assets at our disposal. He pulled up a schematic, a sleek, nightmarish structure that flickered ominously in the dim lighting of the war room. The neurovirus AI drones have completed their final phase of testing. Once deployed, they will infiltrate the enemy's network and turn their systems against them. Hallcroft exhaled, running a hand through his neatly cropped hair. That's not war, Wren. That's annihilation. War, Wren said smoothly, is the art of efficiency. The fewer of our own who die, the better. The question is whether you want victory or sentimentality. Mercer cut across their exchange with a single glance. We don't have time for debates. The first target is the Zenovian primary fleet stationed at the Perida system. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we make sure the entire galaxy knows what it means to provoke Earth. There were no further arguments. The course was set. The fleet launched within the hour. The ship slipped past Earth's orbit in calculated precision, breaking into the vast expanse of space like wolves scenting blood on the wind. The tension aboard the Black Lance was palpable, every officer moving with an edge of urgency that came from knowing that by the end of this campaign, they would either return as victors or not return at all. In the command deck, Hallcroft studied the tactical display with a cold, assessing gaze. The Zenovians had positioned themselves in a standard defensive formation, their capital ships flanked by heavy artillery platforms. It was a formation designed to repel prolonged sieges. Hallcroft did not intend to give them one. "Admiral," one of the lieutenants called out, "we have confirmation. The Zenovians have detected our approach. They're scrambling fighters." Hallcroft gave a small, humorless smile. "Good. Open the fleet-wide channel." A moment later, his voice echoed across every vessel under his command. "This is Admiral Hallcroft. You all know why we are here. Simon Jones was a man of peace, and they murdered him in cold blood. They think we are weak. They think we will kneel." His voice hardened. "Show them what happens when humanity refuses to break." The response came not in words, but in action. The Black Lance surged forward, leading the charge as Earth's fleet fell upon the enemy with ruthless precision. Plasma fire streaked across the void, carving through Zenovian defenses with unrelenting fury. The Dreadnought-class warships deployed their graviton imploders, sending miniature black holes into the heart of enemy formations, crushing ships into nothingness before they even had a chance to retreat. The neurovirus AI drones descended upon the Zenovian flagship like a swarm of predatory insects, infiltrating its network, overriding its command structure. Hallcroft watched with detached satisfaction as the once mighty warship turned its guns upon its own fleet, sowing chaos and discord. Within minutes, the Zenovian forces were in complete disarray. On the ground, Commander Alden King and his elite Ghost unit executed their own mission. Clad in advanced infiltration suits, they moved like shadows through the Zenovian base, neutralizing key personnel with brutal efficiency. King did not believe in drawn-out engagements. A single well-placed bullet was often more effective than a prolonged firefight. "Target acquired," one of his men whispered through the comms, indicating the Zenovian High Commander. King pressed forward, his knife glinting under the sterile artificial light. A moment later, the Zenovian lay lifeless, his blood pooling against the steel floor. By the time the battle ended, the Zenovian fleet had been obliterated, their command structure decimated. It was not just a victory, it was a message. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. For the first time in history, humanity had struck back, not defensively, not as a desperate last stand, but with the full might of their military machine. Fear began to seep into the ranks of the Galactic Council, their once assured dominance shaken. And yet, even as the celebrations commenced, there were whispers of what was to come. The Vorthuan Dominion had been silent. Too silent. Deep within the Council's war chambers, unseen by the human victors, a fleet far beyond the scope of anything Earth had encountered before began to mobilize. Humanity had drawn first blood, but the war was far from over. The Black Lance drifted through the wreckage of the Perida battlefield, its hull streaked with the scars of war, its weapon banks still humming from the devastation they had unleashed. Admiral Benjamin Holcroft stood motionless in the command center, his gaze fixed on the tactical display, where the echoes of their victory still played out in the form of enemy debris tumbling through the void. The Zenobian fleet had been crushed in a matter of hours, their forces obliterated before they had even understood the full scale of Earth's wrath. But there was no satisfaction in the Admiral's expression, only cold calculation. This was just the beginning. General Carl Mercer's voice crackled through the comms. "You've made them bleed. Now they'll either run or come back with something stronger." Holcroft didn't look away from the display. "They won't run," and he was right. The war had escalated beyond skirmishes, beyond border conflicts or political maneuvering. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they scrambled to consolidate what forces they could before Earth's relentless advance swallowed system after system. But it was the Vorthuan Dominion that made all the difference. In the days following the Perida massacre, reports flooded in from reconnaissance units and intercepted transmissions. The Vorthuan had mobilized. Not just a fleet, an armada. Entire planetary defense stations were abandoned as the Dominion's warships converged, a fleet so vast that even the most hardened strategists on Earth found themselves staring at the projections with disbelief. The Vorthuan were the largest and most militarily advanced species in the Galactic Council, their war doctrines shaped by centuries of conquest, their technology generations ahead of even the Zenobians. They had remained silent during the initial conflict, but humanity's brutal efficiency had forced their hand. President Vaughn had made the decision before the war even began. No surrender. No retreat. Mercer knew what that meant. He stood in the war room, surrounded by the brightest tactical minds humanity had left, each of them charting potential engagement zones, calculating odds that never seemed to tip in their favor. The Vorthuan had not sent diplomats, had not issued warnings. They were coming for one reason alone: to erase Earth from existence. "Then we hit them before they hit us," Mercer said, the finality in his tone leaving no room for argument. Holcroft's voice came through the interstellar link, firm and steady. "We take the fight to Zirquil." The war room fell silent. Zirquil was the heart of the Galactic Council, a fortress world fortified beyond comprehension. To strike at it was to drive a blade directly into the throat of their enemies, but it also meant walking into a battlefield where the full force of the Vorthuan would be waiting. It was suicide, and yet there was no alternative. "We don't just need a victory," Holcroft continued. "We need an end to this war. If we take Zirquil, if we dismantle the Council at its source, the Dominion will lose its purpose for this war. Without a governing body to rally behind, the rest of their coalition will fracture." Mercer exhaled slowly. He had known this was coming, had anticipated that the war would lead them to this moment. His mind moved through the logistics, the risks, the countless ways this could end in catastrophe. But Earth had already crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. The battle for Zirquil began 3 days later. The Black Lance emerged from slipspace at the head of a formation unlike anything humanity had ever fielded before. Hundreds of warships surged forward, flanked by drone carriers and AI-controlled destroyers. The orbital defenses of Zirquil lit up in response, the sky above the planet turning into a maelstrom of plasma fire and kinetic rounds. Holcroft moved through the chaos with mechanical precision, issuing orders with the cold efficiency of a surgeon cutting away dead flesh. His fleet punched through the first layer of defenses, but the moment of triumph was short-lived. The Vorthuin arrived. They came not from slip space, not from any detectable route of entry. They simply appeared. The Dominion's warships materialized as if stepping through the fabric of reality itself, their massive, angular hulls unlike anything seen before. Their weapons fired without hesitation, and within seconds, the tide of battle shifted. Earth's ships buckled under the onslaught. Even the Dreadnought-class warships, with their reinforced plating and state-of-the-art shielding, crumpled like paper beneath the Dominion's firepower. The Black Lance's shield screamed under the impact of weapons that Earth's scientists had never even conceived of. In the heart of the storm, Mercer and his ground forces deployed onto Zirquil's surface. The mission was clear: disable the Galactic Council's primary command center. If they could sever the Council's leadership from the war effort, the battle above would shift in their favor. Commander Alden King led the insertion team through the labyrinthine corridors of the Council's headquarters. The fighting was brutal. Zirquil's defenses were not designed for conventional warfare, but for extermination. Automated turrets, combat drones, and genetically engineered sentinels patrolled every corridor. But King and his men were ghosts in the dark, moving with lethal efficiency. They reached the command center just as the Council's remaining delegates attempted to evacuate. King wasted no time. A single shot ended the life of the counselor responsible for Jones's execution. Another shot dropped the Zenovian High Commander. But it was not enough. The Vorthuin had anticipated this. The moment King accessed the mainframe, the entire building went into lockdown. An emergency broadcast pulsed through every comm channel, a voice that sent a chill through even the most hardened soldiers. "We are the architects of order," the Vorthuin Supreme Commander intoned. "Your defiance ends now." Above, the Dominion's flagship, a monstrous construct capable of shattering entire planets, prepared to fire its main weapon. If it fired, Zirquil would be erased, along with every human soldier on its surface. Mercer's voice came through the comms, controlled yet edged with urgency. "King, tell me you have a solution." King stared at the console before him. He could override the security locks. He could transmit a virus into the Dominion's fleet, but there was no time for both. He made his choice. The command override was sent. Across the battlefield, Dominion warships suddenly faltered, their targeting systems thrown into disarray. It was the opening Earth's fleet needed, but it was too late for the ground forces. The countdown to the superweapons firing continued. On board the Black Lance, Holcroft made the only call he could: deploy Project Ragnarok. Dr. Isaac Wren had never wanted his creation to see the light of day. But now, as the final seconds ticked down, he activated the device. A surge of gravitational force erupted from the Black Lance, consuming everything in its wake. The Dominion's flagship imploded in an instant, its colossal form crushed into a singularity. The weapon did not stop there. The surrounding fleet was pulled into the vortex, torn apart molecule by molecule. On Zirquil's surface, Mercer and his remaining forces braced themselves as the shockwave tore through the sky. The war had reached its apex. The Dominion had been dealt a crippling blow, but the cost had yet to be calculated. As the dust settled and the wreckage of war drifted through the void, a single thought remained. Had humanity just won, or had they only ensured the beginning of something far worse? The silence in the aftermath of Project Ragnarok was suffocating. The battlefield above Zirquil had transformed into a graveyard, the wreckage of once mighty warships drifting lifelessly, torn apart by the singularity that had consumed the Vorthuin fleet. Fires still burned in the void, small patches of light flickering against the endless dark. The Black Lance hovered in the chaos, its hull scorched, its systems barely holding together after unleashing the most devastating weapon humanity had ever conceived. Admiral Benjamin Holcroft stood at the bridge, staring at the carnage through the reinforced viewport. His hands gripped the console before him, knuckles white, his jaw clenched so tightly it felt like iron. He had just destroyed an entire fleet in a single stroke, erased tens of thousands of enemy combatants with a weapon he barely understood. A weapon that had not only broken the Vorthuan, but had sent a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was not to be trifled with. But at what cost? General Carl Mercer's voice broke through the stillness. Status report. Holcroft exhaled, his tone measured, but laced with exhaustion. The Dominion's flagship is gone. The fleet has suffered catastrophic losses. Their command structure has collapsed. But we lost contact with the ground team 10 minutes ago. There was a pause. Mercer's voice, though always calm, carried an undercurrent of something Holcroft had never heard from the veteran commander before: doubt. King? Holcroft shook his head. No response. Commander Alden King had been the sharpest blade in Earth's arsenal, the man who always made it out alive. If he was silent now, it could only mean one thing. Mercer turned toward the comms officer. Patch me through to the president. Seconds later, the grainy image of President Nathaniel Vaughn materialized in the holofeed. His face was grim, his normally sharp features weighed down by the magnitude of what had just occurred. Mercer wasted no words. The Council is dead. The Dominion has been shattered. Zirquil is ours. Vaughn nodded slowly, absorbing the report. And the cost? Severe, Mercer admitted. King is missing. The planetary defenses are still partially active. We estimate only 20% of our deployed forces survived the final push. The president leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Then we finish it. There it was. The inevitability of it all. This was not a war that could end with an armistice. Not after Jones's execution. Not after the galaxy had sought to break humanity before it ever had a chance to rise. The enemy had underestimated them, feared them, and now they would come to respect them. But only if there were no loose ends. Only if Earth demonstrated beyond doubt that defiance would be met with unrelenting force. Holcroft exhaled. Are you giving the final order, sir? Vaughn's gaze hardened. I am. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the command hung in the air like a guillotine poised to drop. Then Mercer turned to Holcroft. Deploy the orbital bombardment. No survivors. A ripple of tension passed through the bridge, but no one objected. They had all seen what the Galactic Council had done to Jones. They had all seen how the Dominion had sought to wipe humanity from the stars. Mercy had no place in this war. The Black Lance shifted into position. Alongside it, the surviving warships aligned their cannons, their targeting systems locking onto Zirquil's surface. The city below, once the epicenter of intergalactic diplomacy, was now a broken husk, its towering spires shattered, its streets littered with the wreckage of alien war machines. And yet, there were still those who lived, survivors who had hidden in bunkers, soldiers who had refused to surrender. They would not live for much longer. Holcroft took a steadying breath. Then he gave the order. The sky erupted in fire. Columns of energy lanced down, vaporizing entire districts in seconds. The shockwaves tore through the remains of the council chambers, obliterating everything in their path. The bombardment continued in merciless rhythm. A symphony of destruction played across the dying world. Those who had once held dominion over the stars now faced the wrath of the species they had sought to subjugate. When it was over, nothing remained. Holcroft turned away from the viewport. He did not need to see the aftermath. Mercer stepped forward, his face carved from stone. It's done? Vaughn nodded once before closing the channel. There were no words left to say. For the first time since the war had begun, there was no enemy left to fight. And yet, as the fires of Zirquil dimmed, a hollow silence settled over the fleet. Aboard one of the last surviving enemy vessels, Deep within a fractured Vorthuan warship adrift in the debris field, a single beacon pulsed. A distress signal, weak but unbroken, transmitting one final message into the void. A warning. Earth had won, but the galaxy would never forget.